Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos, and today I am joined by the great, the hilarious, the always fun, made by Jimbob. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me back. I always love coming on here. It's always a fun conversation.
Brother, I always enjoy. In fact, for those of you who don't know, you were my first ever live stream.
Amazing.
And that was a disaster.
That was fun. Now that was only, I think it was 16 and a half minutes of you being like, wait, what? But you worked it. You worked that out pretty quick. By that episode, it was all sorted.
Right. That was the sound. Everybody's always upset with the sound, but. Brother, before we get even going, congratulations on the newest book of Savage Memes.
Thank you.
Where can people, before we even get into the conversation, where can people purchase? Because I know there's a limited number, correct?
Yeah, there's 3,000 copies this time. More than half have been sold through pre-order. The previous volume was 1,000 copies, and the first volume, which is no longer available, was only 750 copies. So you can get it at madebyjimbob.com. It's signed, and I don't print my books again. I do it one off. I don't want to, I don't want to get back into printing them. I don't want them drop shipped. I just want to make them, sign them, send them to people who really like them. And some lucky people have all 3 volumes. And so, yeah, it's fun. It's fun to do it that way.
Right.
For me.
I mean, that's a great way to keep the demand high. That's for sure. How is just like you have the portraits behind you, how's that little industry going? I'm sure that keeps you busy.
This is my favorite, actually. I didn't realize that doing, fairly basic looking memes, my memes aren't known for their technical, artistic, specialness. They're known for how distilled truth is into small little packages. But when I started painting, it was the part that the reason I made a book is because I wanted it in physical. I knew that the future is pretty much, given by who determines whether something can be seen or not digitally. Right. We could probably argue blockchain might change that a little bit, but to be able to paint physically again, because that's where I started, I'm so happy. And it's getting me into all these other directions, because not just painting my meme, but I want to start painting some more biblical imagery. I want to do a series or a limited run of paintings of revelations in my style. So, I don't know if you see this one. This is like busier style. It's like a lot of people. Right, whereas my standard meme style, it's a white background, very simple.
Right.
I want to get into a little more information using my existing style, which is, that's my real signature. People notice the thick uniform lines, wobbly, not realistic necessarily. And so I'm excited about that, because I'm thinking, well, what else can I say with my craft? it's not only just humor. I really love the imagery and the symbolic work that's in the Bible that's available, and to be able to use that without doing any form of like necessarily like heresy, or because once you get into that, even like making a cross or like attempting to draw a saint or Christ, it already feels like off limits to me. I'm like, how could I possibly do that in a way that's my own without it being traditional style? Like, I don't think I would want to, but there are things in biblical texts that is very image driven that's available to me. That seems like, right up my alley.
That's amazing. I may have to purchase one of your paintings on Revelation. That would be that's definitely going to be a timeless item.
Oh yeah, I'm really excited because just the style of it will be unique itself.
So today, for the audience, we are going to be diving into Richard Dawkins. I know a close friend of yours.
Mm-hmm. I started. I don't know. Most of you don't know that I started the term memetics. There's no God. Nah.
And so, you are kind of the meme king right now, at least in the right wing. I mean, even the title of your book, Savage Memes. And so introducing this idea, memetics, memes, the meme war, truth, and then how it all relates to comedy, I think will be really useful for a lot of people. But this whole process for you, making memes, has it been a bit of a whirlwind? Like we were talking privately, you did all these little things over time, and now, I mean, how long has it been? 2-3 years later, you have a literal body of work, and it's so identifiable, as you said. Like, this whole memetic process for you has propelled you into a new place in your life, for your family. How has this whole journey been for you?
Oh, it's been amazing. It's funny that your gift, as you pursue your gift and you pursue truth, you get better at revealing truth in your own unique way. And so it's like it's mutually beneficial to those who view your work and to yourself. Like, to do the work that I do, which is not inversion work or like demonic work or chaos work, when you get into the truth, in the world of the truth, and you're pursuing truth, you're naturally pursuing philosophy. And so I can't do what I do unless I'm honest with the things that I'm looking at and the way they can be expressed. So doing a meme, in my case, a comic meme has to do with culture, economics, theology, philosophy. Ultimately, I have to distill maybe large, complex ideas or arguments into really small amounts of words or frames. And so even that task, even if you weren't doing a drawing, you probably do it. Jay, anyone who's into philosophy is essentially doing that. They're figuring out an informal way of basically arguing something, but then they can tweak it with dialogue, I guess. And so that's what I've been doing. So when I started, it was all commentary on like just basic nonsense culture. It was just like cute, maybe, quirky, nothing really saying anything provocative or earth rattling. And then the more I pursued the more I was drawn back to faith. So there was definitely a relationship between my growth in my own worldview, my path back to faith, and the gift that I had. So I didn't honor my gift as when I had it when I started. It was like I did this, and then I was like, oh, I have a gift. I was actually prophesied, as a baby, to be doing exactly what I'm doing.
Oh, really?
And so that I would have witticisms and inventions as my gift to basically reveal truth to the world. And so, I went away from that. I never really pursued that or thought about that. I didn't plan to be a meme maker, comic person. I was just, mostly floating around LA and just being like, how can I shock people? What can I do that's shocking? And then, that's how it works. If you're in the game of truth, you will come to the conclusion that truth must be a being, and that your targets get smaller and more concise. It's actually become somewhat harder, at least in the sense harder if you're trying to reveal something not new, but something true that hasn't been revealed yet in a certain way. Right. Otherwise, you can kind of stay topical. You can make fun of celebrities. You can, stay within the, bash progressives and commies and all that. But to really push myself, philosophy, theology, scripture, faith, prayer, morality are all giant influences on my work now. And it gets a little bit, it gets easier to see truth and inversion, but it gets sometimes harder because you almost run out of space because things become very clear. Does that make sense? Like things become so clear that you're like, things become redundant because of how clear they are.
Right. No, so I can totally relate to that. Even with me trying to stream 3 times a week and doing what I'm doing, I've always been impressed by your thirst for truth. Since we have ever communicated, you are always reading, growing, learning, expanding your perspective. And that only colors then your memes. And I feel the same way. Dyer, I'm sure he's the exact same way. And there's this process, as you said, when you pursue truth. For me, I know how God almost uses, and I don't mean this in like some Protestant, like I'm inspired, because I'm not worthy of this, but you can feel how you sort of fall in line with really a sort of purpose. You talked about how you're almost prophesized to be doing what you're doing right now. And in a way, myself, I remember when I was little, people thought, about being a minister. Grew up Methodist and all, and I never thought that would happen. And in a way, in a strange, weird way, that's kind of what I do now online. And like you said, the closer you get to Christ, the closer you start to build this relationship. And I look back at my stuff just a year ago or 2 years ago, and the growth, the perspective change is dramatic in my eyes, and the content. It's like I can always come up with because every day something happens, and you can that's for you. I'm sure. Well, that's a meme right there, or that's a whole topic I could discuss right there.
Yeah, it's really powerful too, because from a coherent, holistic worldview, you can look at things, and it's almost our moral God-given obligation to point out inversion, but also to pull it into our own worldview and sort of, I would, for lack of a better phrase, like chew it up and spit it out. Like, take this. It's like what you did with Meta on your stream. It was like you took it, you viewed it for what it is, what it's presenting itself to be, and then you pull it into the theological worldview, and you go, here's what it actually is, and it's nothing new. It's just a fancier version with more things. It's more of the same, and so that's how it gets redundant. But also, that's only for us. That's our own personal battle with boredom. But it's important to remember we're always gaining new followers who are starting early. And the first time I went on Jay Dyer, I was talking about, I was just getting into it, and I'm still very novice in logic and philosophy in general, and it's almost to my advantage because it goes well with the kind of work that I do. It needs to be very basic and simple. But I remember the first time I was on, someone complained and was like, how many times are you going to do this, run this, this David Hume thing and the empiricism? And I told him, the person who asked that, I said, well, the reason everything that you're upset with about the inverted world is paired with the repetition of lies and propaganda and these things, and they're better at repeating it. It's easy to be like, it's just like it's just like general right wingers or liberty based people who are like, you argue for protecting liberty, but the paradox is that the people who aren't about that are the ones always pushing the agenda. And so how do you push the agenda of liberty if it's in opposition to just liberty itself? Right. You know what I mean? Like let everyone be. And then you're all confused when the side that doesn't even buy that starting position takes over your churches, your banking, everything.
Exactly.
And you're like, why can't they just respect, the non-aggression principle? You're like, they do actually.
Which
they
shows
just use
the whole theological framework of sin as
Right.
an entrapment, right? This whole idea of liberty and libertarianism, as you were speaking, that somehow we can all do anything that we want, and as long as it doesn't harm each other. Well, what is the concept of harm, and how do we harm somebody? Because somebody's, I don't care what somebody does in their bedroom. Well, what they do in their bedroom, again, and this is perfect for today's conversation, in Memetics, it actually affects the way that my children grow up and
Absolutely.
the society that they live in. So it directly affects me, even though I'm not there present, or maybe there's a lag in regard to its ripple effect on my life, but it does affect me.
Right. Absolutely. And that's like, not to think in a pragmatic point or general view, but this whole metaverse thing that's going to be rampant, it almost takes the people who pursue their fleshly desires and their appetites, and it puts them in a cell, literal cell in a room, but also in a digital cell out there where they think they're God. But there are no repercussions out there.
Right.
Their pursuit of sins and these things they think aren't affecting their spirit. But because they think it's like, well, it can't be harming people because that's not a person. I can do whatever I want with Maggie Simpson because that's not a real person. It's in the metaverse. Like anything that can be thought of, everyone's personal ideas of heaven and hell or being God will be falsely given to them through this technology. But the good, at least a character, an embodiment of something that I could argue is good, is that the people who are abiding by God's law will still have a physical physical interface. So we can go to our physical locations. We can be on our physical land with our physical family, interact with the physical creation that was given to us to interact with. Right. And so if all those people and the demons and people who reject God want to go into that little, infinite prison.
Right. That's basically exactly what it is.
That's it. Go for it. Because it's going to make it clear for me. Even right now, before any of that stuff, it's very clear to me. It's almost like a blessing to see all the companies in bigger places who are pushing jabby jab or mandates or these things. It's making itself known. The truth is known. It's almost like, you flinch and you're like, oh, this is disgusting. Where's the world heading? But it's really just a map. It's just going, oh, that's how you're doing this. Right. Oh, that's how you're doing. But then, just as well, there are other people who rise up and you go, oh, you're rejecting it. You're rejecting it. You're rejecting it. Cool. Right. It's not.
It's so providential, this evil that has emerged. It's like as they take the blanket or the wool, so to say, and put it over people's eyes, what the blanket was previously covering was God.
Right.
And so as they cover people's eyes, for those who have the eyes to see, everything becomes more and more and more apparent. Where anybody who's living or trying to live a sort of moral life, I don't know how you don't see what's going on. And I think most people do who are living a moral life. And that's why, again, the sin, the passions, whatever your temptations are, getting people attached to these at a deep personal level, this is the fish hook. This is how they bait you into their own entrapment.
Mm-hmm. So, and they end up being slaves to their own appetites. When you could conjure up anything with the helmet on, and you're like, I want this, and this experience. And then they'll add smell, they'll add orgasms, they'll add pain. And it'll just, that's the irony though. It's going to be a bunch of people who think they're their own God and have good reason while they're in this thing. But then you zoom out and it's just a bunch of people with helmets on in really tiny apartments, relying on this input. Relying on a server system, relying on a company to write rules and regulate, it's the ultimate prison. It's really God. It just demonstrates the sense of humor God has is because you're like, oh, you want to be God? The reality of wanting to be God, or the moment that technology allows people to really believe they are God is the polar opposite of being God.
Right.
That's the trick.
Yeah. Exactly. So I wanted to dive into this conversation on memetics by first, for those of you who aren't aware, actually talking about where the term meme comes from. And it comes from 1976, Sir Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, in which he equates, and this is probably the only thing that I saw Richard Dawkins was speaking out against transgender women. He said, transgender women aren't women. I'm like, well, okay, Richard, I'll take you there, Dick. But meme is this term that he talked about at a sort of cultural informational level. And so he was trying to discuss cultural evolution, and that a meme is analogous at the biological level to a gene. A gene is the smallest unit of information, biologically speaking. And so at a cultural level, the meme is the smallest unit of information, culturally speaking. And so the meme then is hosted not in a sort of biological entity, but in the mind. Where is the mind? Well, this is a whole another debate, philosophically speaking. What is the mind? And I'm sure Richard Dawkins probably doesn't even know what, he probably doesn't even believe in the mind. He probably believes in radical materialism.
There's no mind. Yeah, that's absurd. Yeah. My daughter's not my daughter. There's just biological offspring. Yeah.
And so the term meme comes from the Greek word memetes, and it's imitator or pretender. And so, the meme then, and I think orthodoxy, this is again me putting in my own little tidbit here, I think orthodoxy and our theology of icons actually has a theology then of memes, because the whole theology of icons is that Christ is Christ, who is a being, and then we imitate him as icons ourselves, which is a sort of memetic process, generally speaking. But Dawkins' theory originally claimed that memes don't need to be factual. And that's part of his understanding of memes are just this haphazard thing happening in the world, and they can be divorced from truth, and they're just existing in a sort of environment. But for you, and this is a question that I wanted to get your feedback on, is the relationship between the memetic process and truth. Because we talk about how the left can't meme. And I think there's the part that's missing between memes, the sort of right wing, or now the new counterculture, and comedy itself, is that when you do your work, there's pieces of truth. And the truth actually permeates all things, but it can use the memetic process as a vehicle. And so
right.
how do you look at the relationship between memes, comedy, and truth?
Well, I think truth, obviously, for anything said, it's presupposed. You have to start with something true, or you can't even form a sentence. So we always start with truth, and then even a lie, it takes what's true and then inverts it. That's what makes it a lie. Just like, evil would be the privation of good, or light is the absence, or darkness is the absence of light. I see it that way, where, you start with truth, and then the reason like the left can't meme is because in order for you to meme well, you have to cultivate a nice brew of truth, a foundation to go off of. And that's what foundations is, what allows you to create little subcultures. And if memes are within culture, that means you have to start with groundwork so that people know what term is what means what rules each meme or idea plays, and how you can, or you're permitted to build off it logically. If your starting point from the leftist perspective is that truth is relative and nothing's really true, it's all just trending, change, flux, and that whatever's true yesterday might not be true today, and so forth. You could never have a foundation to be good at memeing, because you can't, regardless of if the meme itself is true, right? You could make comedy, you could kind of make people laugh if something's not true. You can do mediocre memeing with straw men, for instance. If it's generally accepted, some conclusion is about an idea or a guy, let's say like Trump, like you can do a meme that makes people laugh, even if it's not actually true, but it's accepted. You're starting with an accepted conclusion about a person. So it could still be funny. But generally, like, it requires truth to get really good at it, but also to build a foundation to work off of. Because, like I said, if you have no foundation of truth, then you can't do little branch offs. You can't do callbacks. You can't, because there's nothing connecting. There's no distinctions connecting. There's no particulars and absolutes. It's all just a mishmash. And that's why the left can't mean. People think it's just because they get upset or they're easily offended. No, it's way deeper than that.
Way deeper than that.
Yeah, it's their starting assumption is nothing. There's no real true foundation. And my overall criticism of that sort of like group thinking, I'm not against collective thinking or in-group preference or things like that, but they want the foundations, but they want to reject truth. They want the religion, they want the family, they want a gay church, they want this and that. They think they're rejecting the foundations. They actually are envious of the foundation. So they want the foundation, but they don't want the truth part. And unfortunately, if you accept the truth part, then morality is true. The distinction of man and women are true. Right. The fact that man and a man can't actually have sex, it's actually a misnomer to call it homosexuality. You can't have sex.
Right.
Two women can't have sex. Two men can't. Sorry to get off into that tangent, but it's relevant because these are these peripheral ideas and concepts that if you're going to split it up into what I find a low tier binary left and right, you're going to find these things. You're going to go, they were championing this thing last year, and now it's no longer avant-garde, and so it's changing, and that's why they can't can't meme. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, absolutely. But that relativism of the left, comedy itself sort of transgresses a boundary that highlights some sort of truth, and that's what makes it funny. But in their world, because of the immense relativism, culturally speaking, morally speaking, what exactly can you transgress? Oh my gosh, he talked bad, Dave Chappelle, about trannies. Right. Oh my gosh. So the things that then within a leftist framework of comedy, what can you transgress? Well, you can only transgress then the boundaries which they're trying to negate and eradicate, which is ultimately in our worldview as Christians is the actual truth.
Right. Absolutely. And people argue, and I know what they mean when they say, well, you can't even tell jokes anymore. They're not allowed to tell a joke. It's actually, I looked further into this just thinking about it, and I was like, it's not the punchline that is trying the attempt to control. It's the premise. And in joke writing, there's a premise. You state it. Sometimes the premise alone is so true that people giggle. They're like, oh my God, that is so true. The premise is, oh, you ever notice how XYZ? And you're like, oh, yeah, it's totally true. I never heard it said that way. That's kind of funny itself. Well, only first when you accept a premise does a joke make its way to your ears. Like you can't start with just the punchline. You have to, and that's what we're dealing with here in general philosophy, in general theology in the world, is that there's all of these competing premises, and a lot of them are just made of nothing. They're made of sand. And then you try to control the premise. And then if you control the premise, and again, this is in the physical form too, because premises, like control the physical premises.
Yeah, exactly. The border, which is a masculine I've talked about this over and over and over. If you guys start looking into the delineation between distinctions, this is why the phallogocentrism or the patriarchy, they hate it, because it always creates boundaries. And when you look into matriarchal society, say a tribal society, when it comes to delineations between sexual partners, well, they have orgies, at the full moon. And so the women don't even know who the fathers of the children are. This is a complete relativism. And this is the sort of matriarchal process. And we see global climate change. This is a pretense, a premise to move us back towards this absolute feminized relativism, where the patriarchal system, the masculine process, is that it's always about erecting, pun intended, erecting boundaries and distinctions between things at a cognitive level, philosophical, theological, but a literal level. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the premise becomes the premises, the physical, the policy writing becomes, the premises get turned into basically a daycare system in that feminine view. We gotta, it's not the as you said, the phallologocentrism is that man creates boundaries and protects. So the care, the taking care of protection, right? It's embedded in the man, right? In that worldview. But what the feminine tries to do is take the feminine approach to protection, but then it's just coddling. It's just you can't go anywhere. And then you see places where it's like it tries, every superhero now, the most violent, unbeatable characters in everything you see now is like basically a 4-foot 11-year-old girl.
Right.
And you're like, it just demonstrates the inversion of it. And the attempt that's what's funny about it is that no boundaries, just like anarchism, no rules, no hierarchy, no power. No boundaries is a boundary. It is an argument for a boundary. No, you can't do that. We have no boundaries. It's so backwards.
Right.
But yeah, that's so it's so important to see that it's a part of a larger worldview, that the male, in the expression of male, is erect, includes walls, includes boundaries and walls. It's not just the penis looking building or rocket ship that I believe NASA is trying to actually mock the masculine by over illustrating, its phallic sense, because you can do it gracefully. You can still represent that in towers and structures and whatever without it being so vulgar, I guess.
Right. And in a way,
but that's a whole other thing.
When you say that, what popped in my mind is that the system itself, whether it be NASA, whether it be the federal government, whether you look at an obelisk in Washington, D.C., that they're taking these incredibly phallic symbols and what they're trying to do is really consolidate the masculine principle to themselves and make sure that there's not a bunch of men out in society, because then that would challenge their government. Again, the whole basis on the small government. So what they're doing is a manipulation of how we understand the masculine principle. I tweeted today about women who don't have a husband. The state becomes their husband. It's their surrogate husband. And so the values, the protective systems, and all this stuff. And I posted a thing on Parent magazine, and all the covers have gay couples, all lesbian couples. It's always a single mother, but no masculine men. And so what the system is doing is making sure, because they have boundaries, they will have a military, they will have a gun pointed to your head. They'll make sure that you do what they want you to do. That's the sort of masculine purpose of the father within the nuclear family, because the mother can't always enforce the boundaries because she wants to nurture and coddle. So the man has to come and enforce the boundaries. And so they're taking the masculine out of the family, and they themselves are becoming the man.
Yeah, they're determining which their own premises, physical and figurative, are appeal to the true masculine of boundaries, walls, force, threat of force, and guidance and rules and all of these things, distinctions. But they want the sheep, right, to be like, well, no, there's no, you don't need a father. You don't need, because there's structures in place, and that's what the government's for. They're going to take care of us as a collective, take care of us, and then it's, it's not just government as daddy, but then it's man as God, because that would be the next step from government to dad, or dad to government. And so, the whole thing, and those are all memetics too. It's transmitting cultural information bits through representation and just onslaught, dumping, constant dumping of these memes until you don't distinguish them. Not us, we can distinguish them, but maybe as a child growing up, you don't distinguish what's not that. You know what I mean? So in order to know what's what, you need the contrast of that and the truth. And so that's really the war of information, is flooding all information, all observable information, and memes you don't know if it's a 1 or a 0. You don't, it's all just out there, and it could be anything. And it makes it harder for people to navigate epistemology, to navigate what's their interaction, what's their role in the world. Well, if you can convince a bunch of people that
there is no actual world, roles, it's all just flux and change. Yeah, that's what the power of memetics is. Yes,
and it's like, then there's no telos. Then there's no. You can't argue there's anywhere to get spiritually. You can't even argue utilitarianism from that point, because it's all arbitrary.
Right.
It's
How
all.
can you claim a utility that's for the greater good?
You just couldn't. And that's kind of where that's the war of spirit requires some war in knowledge and information. And I don't mean information, because I often make this distinction that information matters so far as logic is concerned. You want the law of identity to be true, or to hold and not violate these things, so you could make sense. It's almost like information is human sonar. Like, that's how we ping back and forth the correspondence of what is reality and how we talk about it. Where was I going? Oh, you need these things intact, but information itself, I sometimes equate with, in a sense, material man's knowledge, not wisdom.
Right.
Even though the Bible scripture is technically information, which is actually immaterial. That's what Richard Dawkins got wrong, is that he thinks information, that the gene, the physical, is identical to the information, and it's not.
Right.
It's never identical. And that's the biggest thing against even evolution itself. It starts from the assumption that all of these things are physical. Well, no, information is actually not physical. There's nothing physical. If I write help with sticks on a beach, the word, the meaning, the information help is not identical to the sticks or the symbols.
Right.
It's something else. It requires a coder. The ultimate coder is God.
Right.
It requires an encoder, the medium in which you deliver code. Right. And it requires the decoder, who already understands possibly the syntax, or further, the next level of information, pragmatic information, understands those things. So it takes those three things, and the information is never actually material. It's such a crazy thing about information that people never generally think about. They're like, what do you mean no information? We see the XY and the Y chromosome, and we see the genes, and these are all can be digitized. And you're like, no, the meaning of information is immaterial. You're just looking at patterns, and you need to assume that something's true to make sense of the pattern.
Right. And
none of that. That's why, again, the whole transcendental category is so important in today's argumentation of what's true, what's good,
right,
what's beautiful, what's moral, because we have to acknowledge that there's that we all have faith. Even the atheists, they have faith in these things. They have a lot of faith, and so
they have a lot of faith in themselves. That's for sure. I love your analogy of the coder, the encoding, and then the decoder, because the only reason, because using that framework, us being the decoders obviously insinuates that we're already made in the image. How can we decode something that the lion in the jungle can't decode? That we are unique. We are made in the image of God to participate in these transcendental categories, these non-physical things. As you're saying, the atheist wants you to show me God if God's real. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, show me logic, show me numbers, show me love. You love your daughter, don't you? Okay, well, what?
No, I chemical my daughter. It's different. It's just a chemical response. Get off my lap.
Yeah, I always make the joke. He has her on her lap, and he's trying to work, and
he's like, yes, I could say, we could use the word love, but get off of me. You're not actually my daughter. Yeah.
But that's so true. The coder, and that's something that can't be justified without, in my view, a Christian worldview is that there's a source, that there's a medium, and that there's a decoder, and we already have that. The seamless unity between metaphysical, the transcendental thing, meaning, logic, all of those things. The unity between that, the physical world, and the mind, not the brain, the mind. Those things are just the starting point, preconditions for anything.
Right.
And so no physical material worldview and all other religions can't account. They just start from having that. No, we just have that.
Right.
Of course. Well, how else are we going to form a worldview? You're like, we need to start with the given. You're like, no, it's when you say given, okay, I agree. Given by who? You know, oh no, it's a given. No. What does the term given mean?
Right.
No, it's self-evident. No, I don't really even believe in self-evident. I'm like, everything's faith-based. No, it's just admit that it's faith-based. I actually been using this argument. I wanted to get your feedback because I brought it up with to Jay on one of his streams. Was that I know this isn't a good argument for a particular God, right? But for people in that moment of inquiry where they're like, well, I kind of deep down know that feel created, that any argument against God's existence can be argued against the existence of truth. And that would reveal the faith that everybody has, that no one's without faith. Right. Now, that doesn't mean any argument for a particular God can be argued against truth in the same that same statement, but just generally any because like you said, show me evidence. Right. I tried it. I tried to come up with any argument an atheist has against the existence of God and just transpose it onto truth, and I haven't found one. But it would change if you made a specific claim about a specific God, maybe.
No, I love this.
Once you get
I love this because you're absolutely right. Just like the transcendental argument for God is only arguing for the existence of a God, delineating and differentiating the world. That's a whole different debate than the transcendental argument, and that's where Jay then goes with arguing Muslim. That's a whole. That's an addition to the argument, but as you're highlighting all these non-physical things that we absolutely believe in: logic, reason, truth, love, honor, glory. You can't touch any of those things, but when you see a man that you honor, you can feel it is absolutely 100% real. It's an experience. You know it's real, but you can't touch it. And so then it's like, how do we? Because I totally agree with you that the atheistic arguments against God can totally be transposed to any of the non-physical transcendental categories themselves. And the transcendental categories themselves, then what you're highlighting is somehow they are the bridge back to the source of those categories, of those things. And Orthodox theology, in my mind, as a religious studies scholar, is the only religion that then gives you a logical framework of how you're engaging with these things as the uncreated energies of God. That these are energetic processes. Just as you come to know me and I know you through the things you say, through the things you wear, through the things you do, all of which is an energetic process. That God himself, the way we know God, is through these energies. And so the atheist believes in all these energetic processes, but he refuses to recognize where exactly they come from. And the other worldviews say we're Muslims. Well, then how do we engage with these things? It's going to be real difficult for them to start to argue like a real logical framework for how we engage with God directly. Catholics can't even, again, because of their theology of absolute divine simplicity, which we talked about privately, this privileging of unity over multiplicity is a prerequisite really for the globalist mind state itself. The eradication of distinctions, boundaries, any delineation, where we always, as Christians, have to remember that God is three persons and one essence. And we come to know these three persons on a personal level through energies, just the way that I know you. I can only come to know who Jimbob is on a one-to-one level. And that's exactly how we come to know God, on a one-to-one level. It's a personal relationship, and it's through these energies, just like we engage with the energies. And orthodoxy then doesn't have this dialectical, dualistic framework where truth and falsehood, and then, well, God created both. No. Truth is an energy, and the absence of that energy is falsehood. Just like coldness is the absence of heat. The law of thermodynamics actually plays in favor of my religious worldview, because heat itself is the only positive thing. The absence of heat is coldness. Coldness doesn't have a positive, what's called has a negative existence. And we would say this is evil. This is sin. This is degeneracy. All these things are the absence of God's energies. And that's why it always leads to death, because it's the absence of an energetic process itself.
And that's also why you always need the source, because, I was thinking about this. I was watching like this show Alone, where these people go out in the woods and they live and they encounter freezing temperatures and whatnot, and they're actually prepared. And I was thinking about thermodynamics and cold and heat, and I always found it occurred to me that people they have these boots on, they have the highest level of protection of their feet, right, in this cold weather. And they start losing body mass, and they start losing nutrients and whatnot, and their body, even though they have all of this clothing on, we think visually, like, how could your feet be cold in those boots? How can they be cold? And you realize, like, the cold's not getting into the boots. The cold is the absence of heat, and the starving, in this case, the analogy would be spiritual. The starving of your body prevents you to produce the heat in your foot. It's not the cold getting to your foot.
Great analogy. Yeah.
And you're like, oh, why? I have 3 layers on, and I have these ultra boots, and they're made out of deer guts. And you're like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You can put all of the layers you want. If you don't go to the source and get replenished, it doesn't matter. The foot will fall off. Right. Your soul, your spirit will slowly decay and die. You need light. You need the heat. You need it's generative. It's not protective. And again, that goes into even what we're talking about the government. It's like, it can't be fully protective because something needs to be generated. You need to generate or erect, procreate, embody, permeate that one-to-one relationship through family, friends, father, mother, on and on and on and on. And again, what you said is energy. It's interesting because memetics is that it's information. It's still information. It's memed. We are meming each other, and our meming to and from and of each other needs a source. It needs the coder.
Exactly.
Otherwise, we don't know what it is.
Yeah, the word memetes from the Greek, imitator or pretender. We're imitating each other in this memetic process, but ultimately it comes from Jesus Christ, which again, we have to have a source of the imitation. Who are we imitating? What are we imitating?
Yeah. And a knowable source. Yeah. It's like people get caught up with Jesus, and they're like, well, he's kind of, the Muslims are like, he's a prophet, but he's not identical. And then other people are like, you can't be identical because it's a violation of identity and all these things. You can't, forget trying to mentally understand like Trinitarianism, because you're, from a starting point, if your starting point doesn't allow you to see how that's possible and why it's necessary logically, the one and the many problem and so forth.
Exactly.
But if you can't attack that yet, you have to consider that you can't know God without a personhood. God could exist, and you could know God exists. Like I asked you this question, how do you know? And I asked my mom this too. Is also very, she just knows everything about the Bible, and she had a similar answer. It was like, how do you before Christ, how did people know God? How did you know? And to an extent, you knew God existed, and you knew you couldn't have that level though of personhood. You couldn't have, and that's what that missing element is. It makes total sense with a new era, with a new law.
Well, that's kind of like the theology of the incarnation itself, is that without God, who created the world, also entering his own creation, which is a unique claim in world religions. Again, Christianity is the only one that's claiming that God entered his own creation, that the incarnation is the incarnation of truth. It's the incarnation of all these transcendental categories, these things that you can't touch, but now they're physical. And so when you make a meme, that is a sort of theological incarnational process. You're taking something ethereal, something that exists within the transcendentals, and you're bringing it into three-dimensional space as a physical item. I mean, that is the incarnation reiterated out through all of our lives and all of our processes.
Right. And then we're mimicking creation. We're not the creator. Right. We're mimicking. Right. We're like, how do we, and it's really just, we're transferring. We're pulling from the source, which again, people really need to get this in their heads, that you can't have any meaning. You can't have distinctions in words and meaning. You can't have the laws of identity hold true. And all three laws of thought you can't have without a source of an absolute mind.
Right.
You know, it's pretty easy to argue. I mean, it's like, I always ask people, are the laws of logic concepts? And they go, yeah. And I say, are they absolute? And they'll, you know, depending on where they are in their journey, they'll be like,
yeah.
If they say no, I'll show them that, you know, that's how easy that goes.
They are objective, yeah.
Yeah. And then you go, okay, so are humans absolute? Do we have absolute? No. Can we create absolute concepts? No. We can discern them. Right. No one can justify that either. How do you decode? How do you justify decoding absolute truth? That means all people have access to an immaterial, lawful exchange of meaning.
Right.
Like you can't violate it, and if you try to, you're appealing to it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, you know, we just, again, this whole idea, it's just given. Everything, you know, what else can we do? You know, that's the ultimate atheist defeater. It's like, well, I have no choice, you know. Well, no, it's like you have faith and you can see that there's nothing else that can justify the seamless interaction mentally. Right. Like, we're basically near telepathy. I mean,
through God's word, through language, through this
it's already happening. Everyone's like, telepathy, you read minds. You're like, no. You understand how crazy it is without God. Let's just be like, okay, atheist point of view. You know how crazy it is to consider the exchange of immaterial concepts that aren't identical to the words or the images.
Yes.
And we're just able to go like you only have two choices. It either has to have a baseline source code, or it's gibberish and it really doesn't mean anything. It's just sounds that we have the luxury of being like, oh, that meant ice cream in this particular time period. You know, like it's just sounds buzzing back and forth. And I remember being in a place mentally, you know, in LA before all of this, where I accepted that everything was just buzzing, that it was meaningless. It was ultimately just buzzing. Like us, we're buzzing, and from a cosmic angle, there's no distinction between sounds anyway, so it doesn't matter, man. And from another perspective, there's nothing even there, and from another perspective, you can't even tell what you're looking at. Total absurd, endless regress. You know, what you get sent into is you know, epistemic nihilism. And to what's the word? A resolution, you know, like in a computer, you know, you come into higher resolution, you can see details and make sense of objects and meaning and words. Well, you know, to reject God is to pull your resolution out so wide that there's no distinctions at all. And I guess that's what's the running sort of marketing for spirituality in general. Like, I remember seeing a meme. And this is just proof that effective memes don't necessarily need to be true. They can invert and be effective if they cater to the people who believe the starting position. And so the meme was a big ocean, and then there was a small fish. And the small fish was labeled religion, which I would argue, you know, there's an argument actually that Christianity is not actually religious. It's true on every angle. It's there. You can argue it. But just for the sake of taking religion and being like the attempt to dismiss it generally, just like collective coherent worldview with a God, it labeled the fish religious, and it labeled the entire ocean spiritual. And it was like, see how free. You're like, no, that's just, that means no distinctions.
Right,
that means
exactly.
no spirituality.
Right.
That means nothing's real or true. It's just all one body of indiscernible gray sludge. You know, that's Zuckerberg land.
Exactly.
But again, it's as a meme, you're like, oh, if I was in a certain place between 17 and maybe 24 years old, I'd be like, yeah, totally. It's like religion's like a trap, man, a trap of the mind. You know, you want to free yourself from all of these things, meanings for slaves,
Right. No, I love it. And again, these transcendentals that we participate in them through our noetic processes. Now, how do we understand, we can say a mind. As Orthodox, we would say your noetic process, your mind or your nous, it's tied to your morality. So we would say, Richard Dawkins, if he's engaging in incest or pedophilia or whatever it is, that he may have the most brilliant mind in the world, but he won't be able to actually see truth, because at the heart, and this is the place where we commune with God, is like this noetic, heart-centered, we call the nous, the eye of the soul, the eye of the heart, that it's like our noetic faculties are tied to our heart and our morality. And as we become more moral, we can see more truth. All this stuff is tied together. And for lack of a better term, the mind, the spiritual warfare is in your mind. Orthodoxy is insistent that spiritual attacks, you're not going to be walking down the street and a demon's going to come at you in your face. It's in your mind. It's the mental images in your head. Every sin you've ever committed, every temptation, every passion that you've fall victim to, it begins with the mental image in the mind. And so where is the mind? The mind is the thing, or the nous is that which can participate in all these other non-physical things that we absolutely believe in. And then the memes, even again with Richard Dawkins' theory, the mimetic process is a mental process that it's hosted in, quote unquote, the mind. The same place where the spiritual warfare is. So the mimetic process, where the memes reside in the mind, is the same place where all spiritual attacks take place. And so the girl with the blue hair, that is a meme. And that is in her mind in regards to how that relates then to what they call the Memeplex, the meme complex, the environment, the ecosystem of information that is self-referential, which then makes all those things make sense. She's wearing the blue hair because it actually means all these different things. And right. And just to see then, whether we're talking about memes, whether we're talking about orthodoxy, it's still in this noetic faculty of man that is bridging the absolute physical with that which is non-physical, whether it be the laws of logic or whether it be God himself.
Right. Yeah. And then the fake attempt to do that and try to leave God out of it would be this future, the meta, the Zuckerbergs, the World Economic Forum, the yep. Internet of Bodies, as it will be called yep. Properly in a couple of years by everybody, is forcing that connection in a man-made, customized way, right. That rejects the source. Like it assumes we're the source. We can go anywhere we want. Why the boundaries, man? Like, don't you want to just sit in your little cube? You could be, there's no such thing as even Hawaii. You want to go to Hawaii, you can go to Hawaii and Egypt as one thing, as but just like you were saying, like to truly experience what's real, you know what I mean? Like you're to pursue good, to know God, you need distinctions. You need,
right.
Because we can't have the exchange. We right. can't know each other's energies. We can't know what's true because, if the attempt is to invert meaning itself, my hunch is that there's going to be very few people when that world really starts to get going, that Ready Player One, it's going to be very, very alluring to a lot of people right. and their dreams and what they want and their experiences. But I think it has to collapse on itself because of that reason. What we're talking about is because right. To live in a world of no distinctions and not knowing what's true, not just what's real because you have a headset, but even in the world, what's true, what are the laws, what are the, what can I do, what can't I do? We, as moral beings created in the image, actually desire those rules.
Yeah.
And so we'll know when they're not right. In our hearts.
Yep.
We might reject that feeling. We might go, I don't care.
Yeah,
I'm going to pursue it anyway. Yeah. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to come to terms with things I've thought or done. I don't want to, it's the ultimate, escapism from actual moral truth. They're going to sell it as escapism from this terrible reality where people honk at each other on the street. No, it's actually deeper than that. You're going to sell the escape from confronting your own moral deficiencies. And not only that, but you're going to be able to be paid and to interact economically with sin, like full on. Like we already have that, right? But like, I'm talking about like the magnitude and the speed at which it's possible is unthought of. But again, the good news is that it's not based in truth. Just like the Calhoun mouse experiment that is the smart city.
Yep.
It's based on short-term conveniences and your appetites and things, but it's actually not what the human moral being desires.
Right.
It's only in the short term what they desire. Desired, lowercase desire, larger desire is here, and we all desire, and we can reject the desire, but we desire, and so it's a dead end. It falls apart. As it turns out, it's actually not just getting what we need, sustenance, these things that we really desire, and that we can actually know God even in a short period of time of starvation. You can know God in a long period of mostly not knowing God and knowing him toward the end, knowing him in the beginning, rejecting him in a chunk. These are all our personal, and that's why, the whole, to bring it back to memes, is that the memes were already here before they were scratched on the wall in the
this
cave.
Is right where I wanted to go next. Is Dawkins, in his theory, delineated two types of memetic processes, what he called the controversial versus the informative. And so the controversial memetic processes are just relative cultural expressions that have high variance. So again, like the blue hair, well, that's cultural. Anybody, so that's then a battleground, a competition with all these different memes. But an informational memetic processes is a self-correcting meme that is resistant to evolutionary mutation. And so we can look at, he gave the example in his book of origami. To get the bird at the end, there's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 process. If you don't do that process, you don't get the end result. This is what he would call an informational memetic process that is invariant to change, because you can't change the steps to get the same result. And when we look at now talking about God, talking about sex, talking about homosexuality, how do you get life? There is a informational memetic process that's objective and invariant to change. And so you start seeing that memes, as you said, the memes are already created before he wrote them down. Those are the truths of God. That is the transcendental purpose of man, to commune, to connect with and recognize these things. And so then when we look at this world right now, we are at war with these informational memetic processes. Now they're giving what he would call the controversial. It can just be some random thing. Look at TikTok. Oh, it's the latest dance. But these are leading to a sort of inversion of that which is actually evolutionary resistant. That two men are not parents. This isn't this isn't a family structure. That there is an ABCD 1, 2, 3, 4 process to an objective relationship. And where does life come from? And this is why, whether it be the stabbies, whether it be the lockdowns, when you have the spiritual eyes to see, this is a war of life and death, because they ultimately worship death. Because like the one that I think ultimately at this pyramid of hierarchy is the evil one, is Satan. That's what he still has dominion over, is death and getting you to die. Yeah.
That's really interesting, especially like there's two things that came to mind when you were expressing the origami thing. One is Dawkins doesn't acknowledge that before you can distinguish the step between one and the result, and that's invariant and required, is that all of the things required before you can even discern those things, angles, math, numbers,
exactly
these things, meaning. Anyway, he won't talk about that invariant. He'll only talk about that. Oh, there's a certain form and takes. It's like. Anyway, but then looking at that process, you look at how some of the controversial is then attempted to be sold through that origami, so to speak, is that, oh no, we start here and then we'll move this step. And then the end goal, we'll call it a parent, we'll call it two parents. We'll call it two moms, two dads. Don't look at the process. Don't worry about that. It's just what we're naming it after. And so I see both of those, the only attempt to sell something that's invariant, that's actually controversial, but try to sell it as invariant in that analogy would be to just call it a different name, to color it a different color, to just change the beak, to bend it,
social
stretch
justice
it,
as opposed
like
to
accept.
justice.
Yeah, exactly. Accept that result. And even if it's a big, 300-pound dude with makeup, I'm a woman. Like that's that's actually not true. And that's probably why Dawkins, he has to battle his own sense of relativism in certain categories. But then he inevitably will be up against, they took away an award because he did some trans.
He's a transphobe. I can't stand him.
Yeah, he's a transphobe. Yeah, and so it's funny to watch the materialists then argue for objective truth in certain categories and reject things and that aren't he's not interacting with what's controversial. He's just like, that's not true. I reject that. But it's just interesting to watch people who are in that gray area where they're kind of like, they reject God and all these other immaterial things, but they abide by truth. They just don't realize that the truth must exist before it's expressed in material. Right. Like, remember T-Jump? He battled, okay, that guy, poor guy. I asked him a question on one of his streams. I just said, the same thing. Any argument against the existence of God can be used against the existence of truth. And he said, well, no, I mean, the truth is just our descriptive language, the laws of logic, these things to describe the reality. And I go, no, you can't describe anything without starting with truth. Right. I mean, that's what most people don't get. Yeah, they go, no, it's a description. I can describe the chair and describe angles and these things. And you're like, no, you started from the assumption that something must be true. Exactly. How do you describe describing? How are you going to do that? How are you going to describe the thing that comes before describing, and all these things? And that's one of the big pitfalls of that.
Well, with Dawkins, I think he's struggling too with the whole stabby science. Right. He was again so much in favor of the vaccine, getting stabbed, and then people are saying, well, look at this scientific data. Look at this statistical evidence out of Israel. So again, over 90%, I think it was like 93, 94 is probably higher now, percent stabbed. Look at the cases they're having. Look at the major outbreaks. Look at the increase in death. And it's like this breakdown, this cognitive breakdown, because I worship science, I worship truth, but it's like they don't know where to go.
No, they don't. And they're getting, and hopefully some of those people kind of pop like pimples because the pressure has to push you. The displacement must occur. You can't just stay in. You will be pushed to one side. You can't just not take a stance. But yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, even in like Scotland, it was like 89% jabby jabbed, and then it was like 30% something increase of very bizarre. Right? It's like all this stuff. We can't even talk about it on here. But
I know you have to use it's hidden language.
Yeah, it's insane. But yeah, that I've watched that before. The same with like Sam Harris. Yep. Discussing like IQ stuff, or I just don't. And it's like you don't need to have a value judgment to admit any kind of things, because you're the ones presenting science. I don't even abide by it because I don't look at my worldview doesn't determine the value of humans based on how smart they are and whatnot. That's why Christianity is so epic is because it gives you a perfectly coherent way to address humans, a way to categorize them as unique, but also the same image under God's creation, and that, you know, it gives us a basis for a coherent basis for morality. You know, why an act against man is an act against God? Well, because you couldn't say the same for a goat. You could be. I actually want to ask you about that. The kindness that we are I would argue, might be expected of us for other creations, other of God's creations. Is that's not a direct, it might be a command if you have a scripture, but it's like, obviously I reject veganism in these things, but it's like, where's the line of treating other animals with some level of dignity, but it's not identical to man, and you're not going to the world of they're also created in God's image and all is one man. Like, where do you go? Like, what's the guidance or scripture around, well, you can actually hunt and kill a cow, but you honor it. There's honor there. There's dignity there. But so this area, I'm still like kind of going, I can't argue it. I can't argue either point, because I'm like, I know what cruelty is in that's another, it's like an energy. It's not in the material. That thing is cruel. Like, no, it's another thing. It's a meme. It's another. So what is your take on that?
So in regards to, because that hits on a few different theological topics. One is death and how its entrance into the world through the fall. So as Orthodox Christians, there's nothing wrong with eating meat. Now, if this was a pre-Edenic state, death doesn't exist, because we're made in the image of God, and because we're made in the image of God, we have free will. That's how we then chose the opposite of God. But this was because God wanted to create something to experience true love, because the Trinity has one will. Multiplicity is necessary for love. You can't just always love yourself. And this is where, again, the people who have theological frameworks where it's just absolute unity, and then they want to talk about God as, well, what does God ultimately love? He just loves himself. In a Christian framework, that is not the point. God has to love something outside himself. He loves the other person of the Trinity, but then creation itself was to create something in his image to participate in the ability to love, which can only come through free will and cannot be forced. So it cannot be forced. In regards to eating the animals, there's this mimetic relationship too between our relationship to Christ and our relationship to the animals. It's like we can look at Christ and humanity as a steward. We are his flock. We are supposed to be led by him. And at the same time, Adam was the steward of creation. Now, once death enters in, now the whole eating of animals, this is something that isn't going to end till the end of the world. And so this isn't a sin. Veganism, the equating, because as soon as then you equate animals or man as animal, now you've lowered his status within creation. And that's part of the satanic process of getting us to be identical with and identify as animals. I think Darwinian Wallace theory of evolution, it takes us away from that pedestal made in the image of God, where we look back at which is created, the animals which aren't fully made in the image. Therefore, we shepherd them the same way that who we're made in the image of shepherds us.
Gotcha. So in a way, in two indirect moves, let's say like some person is hurting, right? And they just beat a dog, a stray dog, just like torture, beat it.
Right.
They're in effect, indirectly, it's an act against, in that hierarchy that you just laid out. It's still an act against God, but not directly in an image. And it's also an act against yourself.
Yes.
And you could probably argue the act itself is just an expression of an already rejection of God, godliness in yourself.
Right.
So it's not the act itself. That's why I've always argued against, there are certain acts against God, but what happens before the act is already an act against God. Like the thought, to be in a space where you would act against God, you're already acting. I would argue you're already acting against
Right.
God,
Because
You know
the
what I mean?
energy to do that
right?
is not the energies, because God, again, compassion and mercy, for example, we would say are uncreated energies of God. The only thing that can display mercy and compassion at a rational level is mankind, because we're made in the
Right.
image. And it has to be done at a one-to-one level. So you can't be, oh, I'm so merciful because I love humanity. Well, what is humanity? You can only be merciful to the man on the street who needs your $5 right then and there. That's the only time you can show what compassion is. So then life itself is always trying us. We're always bombarded with these experiences. Well, are you going to choose the positive energetic process of God's energies, or are you going to choose the opposite, the absence of God's energies? And so if you're going to beat a dog, you're choosing a lack of compassion, a lack of mercy, and you're ultimately fighting life itself, which is an energetic source coming from the Creator.
Right. Right. And then you get into, well, there are people who use their compassion, what they sense, their feeling, that might be actually true compassion, but then they express it in a way that's still acting against God. For instance, like, a rabbi's like, marry the two girls, it's fine,
Right.
whatever it is, it's utilizing the energy of compassion, but the act can be inverted. And it's not like, I'm gonna marry them, like, you're not angry, you're not beating something to death.
Right.
You're like, oh, this is giving. I'm gonna give to the, out of compassion, I'm gonna donate to Hillary Clinton.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right, because compassion without the foundation ultimately can't still be compassion. So compassion for the gay couple saying, oh, well, I care about people and I'm merciful and I'm compassionate. We're all sinners. And therefore, go ahead, marry the gay couple in the synagogue or the church.
Right.
Well, that's not compassion if you don't have the foundation of right and wrong itself. Because what would be compassion? And this is what Christ. This is why the Catholic Jesuit priest who's always in advocacy of the LGBTQ stuff drives me nuts. Because Christ didn't. He went and hung out with the prostitutes, the criminals, the tax collectors, the least desired in society. But he always called them to change because of his compassion, because he cared about them. He literally was one with them, but they also had to change. So the compassionate thing from an Orthodox perspective with the gay couple is you can come as you are. Come to the church. You're a homosexual. You're welcome. Come. But you can't stay there. Because Christ doesn't allow stagnation, because stagnation itself is death. You aren't a finished product being the homosexual, lesbian, whatever you are. You are in a process. You need to come and get closer to God. The hospital is the church. And therefore, the physician of souls, Christ, can now begin to work on you and change you, because that's the real compassion. And then you, through that process, say you went down that process and now you've renounced your previous sins, and now you're pursuing a heterosexual, a correct ordering of relationships. You now want to pursue life because you want to have children. Now you can have mercy and compassion on those same people and be icons of Christ, a mimetic process of bringing them out of where they're at towards where you are, the light.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And all of the structures and necessary orders, not to use Dawkins as our best framework, but the act of union under God, the act of sex to create, to express in our limited capacity the essence of love, to just to be godlike in our lowercase creation.
Right.
You can't express love. You can't do that if you're of the same sex. You can only express love in a brotherly way.
Right.
My mom has a really good friend who lives a gay life, and she just asked him, she's like, what's the difference between men loving each other and homosexuality? And he already knew the answer. He just said, yeah, one's brotherly love, the other's is your desires.
Yeah, it's
lust,
exactly. It's
passion,
the passionate divulging or diving into your own sin.
Right.
That's the big difference there.
Yeah. And so that gets confusing with people because they're like, I'd say, if you remove the moral aspect, which I don't always do, but some people aren't there yet. You can't just sometimes skip to it. Like, is that, back to like, you can't create, like for instance, there are people, even biblically, eunuchs and people who are, off a little bit in their how they were made. And that's just like someone who's created with maybe a little more tendency to harm fellow man or himself, or alcoholism or addiction or whatever.
Right.
There's an element that's there to acknowledge that's there, right? But there's a difference between what you're attracted to and what you act on.
Yes.
And so a lot of people don't get this. They go, well, it's not my fault I'm sexually attracted to the same sex. But the thing is, it's not about fault. It's that you can't conflate activity with your compulsion, your impulses, your thoughts, because then you could just argue, well, it's not his fault. He likes little kittens.
Exactly.
It's not his fault. He or he likes little babies,
or drug addict, or whatever
it is. It's just, let him express himself, man. Right. And you're like, well, no, the argument also isn't not to let people, because they're going to do what they're going to do. Right. Your free will. That's you're acting, that's your thing. But I always, to get really like, and Richard Dawkins might approach this as well, because, from an evolutionary standpoint, there's nothing advantageous about homosexuality at all. From a genetic mimetic, transfer of information that's advantageous to survival, there's no argument there. But the other thing is, if you're attracted to the same sex, it doesn't make sense, because you would say, I'm sexually attracted to the same sex, whether you're a woman or a man. Right. But it's not logically, it doesn't fit in with the origami steps, because you can't have sex with the idea that you're attracted to. Right. It'd be like saying I'm sexually attracted to a tree. Right. You can't actually have intercourse, sex, procreation, sex, what sex actually is, with the same. And so there's a logical inconsistency there. Yep. And atheists or moral relativists or evolutionary biologists actually have to confront this, because, and why it's powerful is it doesn't just appeal to morality. They can just discard it and be like, you believe that, I don't. But there's a violation of identity in that process. Right. The term itself is inconsistent with reality. You can't actually have sex with a chair or a plant or the same sex. You'll do something else, but that's not what it is. And so, I've been looking at that a lot, and I'm like, wow, there actually is another way to look at this. And it's actually looking at it from, what are the starting assumptions? Why are we using language that's inconsistent even with reality? And that's why you get this whole other aspect to flood it with pansexual, object sexual. The idea is that anything can be sex, because
exactly the redefining of what sex is. That's why even in a Christian context, I'm in a relationship right now. No sex before marriage. Not because sex itself as a category, even if we were to participate in heterosexual sex outside the covenant of marriage, it's still not the full thing. It's still not the full energies of God, of which I, being made in the image, get to participate in. And so if I want to participate in God, I want to participate in these things that give me access to these energies, like a sense of authentic, deep love. But it has to be in the right context, because if it's only because I can't control my passions pre-sex or pre-marriage, then that's an absence of God's energy. That's a weakness. That's a negative. And that's what then all the sin is. All of it is a free will choice to choose the absence of the energies.
Right. And that would be the true value version of love and sex. Right. It would be the true value, the Walmart version, which is funny, because I always make the distinction between logos, however you would prefer to pronounce it, logos, and logos, actually logos, like company logos, like sell you the lowercase logo.
Yes.
Like the lowercase order, the lowercase meaning of life. Again, memetics, a Nike sign, the symbols, where our culture's about this. They're attempting to create through memes, through
Bits of information.
They're trying to build foundations,
Right.
but you can't, because you need to borrow. You're always borrowing, and that's why the progressives, they smell out foundations.
Right.
Where's the foundation? I'm in a very conservative, very religiously foundational Christian town, and it's probably 80,000 people, maybe reaching 100, and I could see it, whether it's just the kids who are coddled, who are going off into blue hair land,
Right.
or the moving in, or the more, same-sex couples with kids at the playground. And it's like they need that order, and they're actually seeking God. They're not seeking just pragmatic, safe places. That's just an expression.
Right.
Those are, that safety, like conservative, right-wing, guns, no crime, these kinds of things. Those are just kind of perks. But they have to start. They start before that. These
Right.
foundations, the sense that we're all made in God's image, and that's a code that's not law. That's not based in law. It's not given by man-made law. And so that's why they seek these things. But here's what they do: is they go in and they go, "Oh, look at all those bricks. They have so much. It's built on white supremacy. All these bricks, or whatever they say." And what they do is they don't reject the foundation, because they actually seek it. They want it.
Right.
They want that. They just slowly start, I want to take this brick out and use a pink, more fluffy one,
Right.
brick, put it in there. And then you slowly replace the bricks with things that are not made out of structures that can hold a house,
Right.
or a city, or a civilization. And it's a lie.
Right.
They're lying to themselves, because
Well, as we talked about before the stream privately, the absurdity of it all that leads
Right.
to it, and how it really is, without the spiritual framework, you're not going to see the ultimate absurdity itself, which is Lucifer rejecting, being jealous of, and wanting to be God. Now, he knows he's created, and he was the most beautiful and the most intelligent angel. So then we see aesthetics and intelligence being the easiest ways that all of us fall victim to worshiping ourselves the same way that Lucifer did. And so the evil one, who then falls as Satan or the devil, or however you want to talk about it, what is more absurd than rejecting God? And so then they have to come up, because of the ultimate absurdity, they have to mask it with like duct tape forms of foundational truth. And so pansexualism or whatever it is. And so this leads to then the concept I want to talk about is the memeplex, the complex of ideas that memes themselves, because for the woman to wear the blue hair or to identify as pansexual is to bring the mind into a new informational ecosystem, which then, again, it's always self-referential, and that people talking about memetics talked about how the memeplex, or these large ecosystems of memes, it is like, they would say, well, it's like a religion. And that's exactly what it is. Again, our religion, being Christian-based, is more encompassing of the whole thing, but their religion is the religion of the opposition of God, whether they know it or not, which is the ultimate absurdity, because they're following the same individual, the same person, Lucifer himself, who did the exact same thing. And they can't help but recapitulate this same process over and over and over and over and over.
Right. And it's almost like the only way to really create a circumstance or condition for them to ongoingly believe that is to provide the digidata system, the true memeplex system, which is not the truth of God's creation, nature, the laws that hold us to the ground and whatnot. It's some other thing, but the reality, the Faustian deal, is that they're laying emaciated in an Amazon pod container, waiting for their next delivery from Stephen Hawking hologram,
right?
And they're like, well, yeah, but I have to go back. If I can just afford to go back, and that'll be it. It'll be. That's where they need to be, and being in reality is unbearable. And for us, it'll be being in that place is unbearable, because it just violates everything about what's true and good. But then I had a question for you. there will be, because I don't want to I'm not a fear monger, but I like to identify what's true about these trends and where they're going and what it looks like. But at the same point, there might be people who are called into those memeplexes, into those inverted worlds, to actually share the word, as crazy as it sounds, where you're in this crazy demented world where you're speaking the word of God to a tree because some guy somewhere thinks he gets to be a tree in here. I'm a tree in here. And it'll actually be harder probably to do that. Right. To share the word in that context, because you don't have these direct energies. This is even
that's why they don't want one-to-one interaction. They want us to be in the metaverse where you interact with my avatar, so you don't even interact with the image of God, like my literal physical biology that God created, not the synthetic mRNA technology.
Yeah, you think the mask is bad. I had the meme of like, I'm made in the image of God, and the next girl's like, put your mask on. Well, to hide full imagery of God's image. I mean, that's what that's the starting point. All the other craziness from that. I mean, it's really important to look at this, because people will say, and rightly so, they'll be like, the kind of degeneracy that's going to go on in those worlds is you don't even want to imagine it. Okay. Mm-hmm. But the starting point requires hiding the image of God. You know why? Because it'll be worse. The things that are degenerate will be worse if the avatars maintain the image of God. They'll actually occur worse.
Right.
They'll be like, at least be a grasshopper.
Right.
It's like, at least be a grasshopper.
Right.
These are the conversations that are going to happen. And they're going to prove ongoingly that you can't actually, as much as you would like to, you're drawn to it is to reject God so you can go into your own safe haven of sin. These things are still going to affect people in the physical, in the spirit. Right. But they're going to think because they have a helmet on and they're in their little cage, that's not affecting. How does that affect? Well, my friend was telling me he's tried these technologies, like spray painting. He started developing memories that weren't real memories, that were memories from another environment that never actually happened really. But that's another aspect of this. Right. It's relevant. It's relevant because that is the memeplex. Because if you can convince people to not only hide the image of God, but then to operate and recode all your memories to not be in the creation, his creation, the sky, the heavens, the universe, all of the things in nature, the beauty, even the harshness, the consequences. The consequences of the physical world are just a mimetic of to me the spiritual consequences. It's like a reminder: you're gonna die. You're gonna die. There's gonna be judgment. Well, in those worlds, you get to hide not just the image but the beauty. Right. And they'll argue, no, it's the opposite. I can create unlimited beauty here. Unlimited. Right. You're like, not without borrowing.
Right, exactly. No, and when you're talking about the memories, but it immediately jumped in my mind is, again, as Orthodox, when somebody dies, we always say, memory eternal memory, because we believe that this is why when you're baptized in the Orthodox faith, you're given a Christian name, because God, the way that we are existing for eternity in the afterlife is that God remembers us. And that those who he doesn't remember are the people who ultimately are going to dissipate. They're going to lose the personhood. They're going to lose their image of God. And so to implant false memories is to negate your existence at a sort of a theological level, as they're literally trying to eradicate you, because your memories, if there is a judgment day, obviously we believe that there's a judgment day. If you have false memories, I mean, you don't even know what you're going to be judged upon, because you can't even remember what you did.
No,
and so you're losing your soul immediately.
Yeah, you can't even have the sense of self-judgment reflection.
Right.
Change. But that's exactly why it's going to fail, and it's totally consistent with the world itself. It's just a sped up fake version of what the real version of the world will be in its end. Is that they're almost like forcing the narrative that they argue isn't true by just replicating it quickly in a metaverse. You're like, yeah, go ahead. Right. I mean, go for it.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So in regards to memetics, there's two more terms I want to introduce that I think are really useful to looking at the way the world is happening right now. One is eumimics. So it's like eugenics, but you replace gene with meme. And this is the idea of deliberately altering or controlling the meme pool, the pool of acceptable memes to even for people to choose from. And then there's the term memocide, which is about genocide, which is about intentionally eradicating a meme or memeplex by killing its carriers or through censorship. And so when we look at the world right now, the memocide of Christ, they're trying, and that's why you see then all the progressive ministers or the progressive Catholic priest. This is a spiritual war, and it's a spiritual attack. It's a spiritual memocide on the complexes that carry our truth. And that, so then the system itself, which is ultimately satanic, either wants you to die or it wants absolute censorship of your ability to transport memes into the available meme pool. So, and they're doing eugenics right now, and they're doing eumimics right now. They're doing genocide right now, and they're doing memocide right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great format to look at it. That's exactly what it is. And again, back to the beginning where we're talking about comedy, the true, memocide would be it's premicide. It's like, it's premicide because the memes are just reflection of what your starting point is. So Christ, it's not just the iterations, it's that logos, it's the connecting the worlds of the mind, the immaterial and the physical. And so, they can attempt to do that. What occurred to me is that you, just like a truth claim, to argue against truth, you ultimately need some meme in their view that you need to borrow constantly. You can't actually eliminate completely because it's just like the distinction of that. The distinction is that this is where they might be accurate, is that the distinction that the battle of good and evil is not flesh and blood, and so in the same respect, you can't kill off evil. Right. And in their view, you can't kill off good or those who represent good, because if we're made in the image of God, you'd have to kill yourself. Right. That's the ultimate end of bad things in their world, which is like, the whole vegan crazy approach is just kill all humans, and then you're good. Right. But in addition to that, though, like you can't, from the perspective of eliminating memes, you have to, because Christ and truth are consistent memes. You can't really kill one. You can't kill either.
Well, that's why he resurrects, right? Yeah. Christ can't die. He literally
so he can't.
He'll always resurrect from the dead. So as much as you want to try to sabotage, destroy, obfuscate the truth, right? At the same time, just like we say, to obfuscate, they're taking a blanket or the wool and putting it over people's eyes. But to do that is to take the wool or the blanket of what you were trying to cover in the first place, which was God.
Exactly. Yeah, it's totally self-refuting. It might work for a while and it'd be horrible. We could see where it's led for people to reject truth itself, even if most of us can see how silly and logically inconsistent that is. But yeah, they attempt to do it. But again, you can't kill Christ and you can't kill the truth. And so, because you're always arguing for something that should be true. I mean, look at all of like Netflix and all these things. They're always presenting what they think should be true, not what's actually true. And the better forms of creativity, whether it's architecture, memeing, animation, movie making, book writing, what made them good classically is that they actually honor, even if they don't get to Christ, they honor what's actually true, the truth of who we are, the truth of the distinctions. At least they were closer, even if some of them rejected. And so you can't ever delete all of that because you need it. It's just like the laws of logic. Right. It's like it can really be reduced from the knowledge perspective, logic,
Right.
but from the spiritual perspective, the thing what you just said is exactly what it is. It's like, oh, it's like the joke's on them. It's like you're gonna, all you're doing is revealing. I mean, you're doing the job for us. What could take us a long time with these personal interactions and sharing scripture and prayer and being there for people when we need them and representing Christ-like energies in our life. They could very well beat us to our own game by just revealing the truth by their attempt to hide it. I mean, it's kind of perfect.
I know it. Well, it shows that absurdity and that sort of oxymoronic, the paradoxical state of all this stuff.
Right.
But I wanted to, we're coming up on 2 hours, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I wanted to then take this large conversation on memetics, memes, comedy, truth, and bring it to a sort of pragmatic level for anybody listening and how they can participate in this larger Memeplex, because we are in a meme war. We're in a culture war. We're in a literal World War III, and I believe the meme war is a reverberate. It's some type of facet of World War III. I mean, we are in it right now. It's happening. And so how then can anybody watching, any male, female watching, participate in the meme war? And my argument is that everything you do is memetic. That memetics isn't just the memes that you share on social media. Memetics isn't just getting on here trying to spout ideas or come up with clever little terms. It is the way you speak to people. It is the way you treat people. It's the way you walk, the way you dress. It's you as an individual, again, as an icon of Christ, you moving through space and time are emitting memes. You can't help but be a memetic process by existing in the world. And so I've heard you speak to people wanting to, that you were saying people need to be more punctual, more deliberate in the way that they look, more impeccable, I think is the term that you used. Can speak to anybody listening on how their gift may not be Jimbob's gift, but them by being made in the image of God and existing, they can participate in the same fight, the same struggle that you and I are trying to participate in.
Right. Yeah. I always tell people to find their gift. And if they don't know, pray for discernment or ask other people to tell them what that might be. And that using your unique gift in whatever it is, you can meme. You could, meme Christ. We are meming, like David says, we're meming Christ. So being Christ-like, following that path is a meme. And so that's what they want. There are people who want to minimize that. And so just doing that in the way you know how to do it is one way. But if you can get your gift, then you could really start to expand on how you do it. And then it gives you a real passion for it because it's unique to you and your relationship and your relationships, and that you can actually pursue it that way. So it's not just, you're not just handing out a card. You're not just sharing a meme. We all desire to know our gifts, but beyond that, knowing the gift doesn't actually get you to sharing it. It's really in the sharing it, the one-to-one that allows you to cherish and honor your gift is that sharing of it. And so, yeah, that meme war is it's probably one of the most exciting wars for people like us creatively, because it's in high demand. You might look at the dark side and be like, oh, it's all caving in. No, there's no better time to do it, to meme Christ-like behavior. And again, like David said, it's not just making something and like, what do I make and how do I do it? And I don't have enough money. Being Christ-like or sharing the word of God, sharing a scripture, sharing something relevant, looking at what's relevant today, even scripturally, not just random scriptures, something's relevant that resonates is also a meme war. And again, that when that gets transferred and transmitted, you're already in that battle anyway. So you might as well just sharpen the tools. Again, I would also learn some low level logic and philosophy. So you're able to, because your words and your tools. The word is the ultimate tool that cuts through all things.
Right.
What's the scripture? It cuts
Right.
through
Exactly.
skin and muscle and fascia and soul and spirit. It's the sharpest thing. So, but the duller are your limited gifts, your limited human traits, the things you make that are, temporal.
Right.
But what's beyond temporal is that exchange. Again, the information, the meme itself is not identical to the item. No, it's actually exciting. People should definitely, if you are feeling down, obviously there's prayer, there's getting together with other people, humor, getting attention off yourself. But if you're feeling, sort of like down because of the degeneracy and what you think the future is going to be, just a reminder that that's actually the indicator to activate yourself.
Yeah. Right.
You know what I mean? It's the ultimate
catalyst.
indicator. It's good news. It means bring the good news.
Right.
Joyful, and you can be joyful. I mean, people get this attempt that you're supposed to be this like yelling preacher, and it's all this conviction and pointing and screaming. No, you're also commanded to be joyful. Right. There's a time to raise your voice and be powerful like that. Mm-hmm. But the joyful is the tool that they can't hide. And guess what? Joy is another energy of God. So like you can't hide joy. And if you think you're going to hide Christianity and delete all of the memes and all of the accounts and all of this shit and create all your favorite satanic temple, guess what? People crave joy. And guess what? The world can't deliver it.
Right.
So don't worry, just don't worry.
Right. No, despair is a sin. And that's what the Christians that I see get a little bit too desperate, a little too deep in despair. It's like, where's your faith? I mean, you must not be praying. You must not be engaging in the things that should revive you and give you hope.
Absolutely. One more thing about that specifically is that if you're in despair and you're like confused on why it's perpetuating, consider that your current worldview, even if you're a practicing Christian, if you're experiencing that, it's likely that you're basing what is good. You're basing everything in a material outcome. You're basing your future not in a spiritual, but you're basing it as what's going to happen. Because here's the ridiculousness. I was trying to meme it in a funny way. It was like a guy who can't wait. He just can't wait to be with the Lord, be eternal, connected. And the next thing is he's in this circumstance where he's so desperate to not die. And there's this, that's the ultimate encapsulation of what I'm talking to is that, if you're in despair, you're not in a spiritual war anymore. You're in this pragmatic utility war where you're like, if we could just change the outcome, I really don't like the physical outcome of what I'm thinking is going to happen. Well, if you're a Christian, you don't get to actually change the actual story. You get to willfully participate in the story.
Right. And your suffering is a gift. This is one that really blew my mind when I heard Father Peter Heers talk about the saints, the people who literally were murdered under the Bolsheviks in 1917. They wrote how thankful they were for their persecution because it allowed them to be images of God in space and time, and that they just prayed that they were worthy for the death that they were going to receive. And to hear that of people that literally sacrificed themselves, it's like, wow. And I'm upset about the internet. I'm upset about Zuckerberg. Like, come on. Like, I am so weak. Again, then you realize, wow, I've been emasculated so far from where people were at the beginning of the 20th century.
Right. Absolutely. My mom would tell me this. It's pretty morbid, but this conveyed always as a child how deep your faith actually needs to be. And it's biblically validated. She said, there might be people in your life who take your sister and put a gun to her head and ask you to reject God, to reject Christ. And she said, you let them do it.
Right.
That's how
Their
fierce
souls,
my mom
that
is.
would yeah.
Right.
Make the
And it's that fear of death that you're like, no, I just needed to say yes so that I can then then do something else, and then I'll get it back, and I'll call God on the line. It's like this negotiation. Like you're on the phone with I used to pray like that, by the way, before I found philosophy. Yeah, I was like talking to the bank, reverse the overcharges. But truly, that's how tested people were before. That's how sort of coddled and insulated we all are now, is that we don't even know hardship.
Right.
We don't even know true long suffering, in that you don't seek it, but you accept it when it comes, because just like you referenced the saints, that you're worthy of the suffering.
Yes.
It's not deserving. It's not like people confuse that maybe those two. It's like, I don't deserve this. I prayed all the time.
Right.
No, that's you also being God. What do you mean? Why doesn't this happen to a bad person?
Right. Right.
Then that's, again, through God, you can transcend. How the Eastern, the meditation, the transcendental meditations and whatnot. The practice of transcending what they think space time is, and pain, and then things. I've actually practiced in those things. I've done Vipassana. I've done the 10-day thing. I've experienced overcoming true, pain through senses and things like that. But the ultimate is really that despair is beyond that little practice. It's that your faith can accept pain. Not it's not like I have faith, so take away the pain.
Right.
It's that you can endure pain.
Right. If we're going to follow Christ, we have to do as he did. For love in his obedience to his Father, he literally took on the sins and the pain of the world.
Right.
I mean, that's how we follow. And so the Joel Osteens of the world, the feel-good Christians, no wonder they're okay with homosexuality, because they fear the persecution. They fear the pain more than they fear the evil one, because he's going to give you the comforts. Because as we began with the sin, the passion, the temptations, that's the bait, that's the hook that he lures you into the absurd meme complex. Right. So, man, wow. Funny how everything kind of ties up there.
It does.
If you have a few minutes, we got a few super chats. I had one that I wrote down that I was curious of your thoughts, that was kind of adjacent to our conversation. Was, I'm sure you've seen all this stuff going on with Let's Go Brandon. And I recently saw a video on Twitter of MetLife Stadium where the Giants and the Jets play, the NFL teams. And there was a soccer game going on, and they were getting ready to start the game. And normally where it goes, let's go, let's say Giants, do, like the stadium's getting ready to do that. And they were supposed to chant for the soccer team. And the entire stadium started chanting, "Let's go, Brandon!" And it kind of gave me hairs raised the hairs on the back of my neck, because it's like the diversity, the multiplicity of peoples that a meme, and it's so subtle, it's so useful, is bringing, and it was done by the NBC reporter to cover up what they were actually chanting, and this backfiring. That I wanted to say this: where do you think we are in the meme war? Not that not that you're omniscient or anything, but what's your sense in your spirit where we're at?
I think we're always winning the meme war, and by we, I don't mean conservatism. I mean Christian theology.
Right.
I think that because it's all, again, back to the beginning of all of this. It's what's assumed. How do you get your truth? How do you justify the existence of truth itself? That's where all memes will derive from, that starting point. So. Things like that show that memes, that memes are very powerful, and that collectively you can have people on board something larger. Like I don't even think a lot of people could fully, in that case, that's a very politically confined meme.
Right.
Let's go, Brandon. Right. So again, you and me and many others like us, we operate on a larger paradigm than that. But of course,
before the normies.
What it represents though is that you can actually use very simple metaphysics combined with what would it say, cultural phenomena, to unify people.
Right.
But the thing that I would criticize about that is that, again, it's kept in it's lower tier binary. It's not theological.
Right,
it's not. It's some other championing of something that in the end doesn't get you necessarily closer to God. It might indirectly, maybe. But again, it shows what's possible, though. If it was like, here's an example. I did a cross-country trip with my family, and we drove through Wyoming. It was horrible. Like, Wyoming was just like, it was like, all the references of the desert or the wilderness in the Bible. It was like that. And I was like, but we stopped in this little town, and there's this like cool, like, I forgot what they call it. It's like you eat, it's a way to eat next to a rodeo. I forgot what it's called. But we ate this great barbecue, and then we were walking over to the rodeo, and it was small, maybe 10,000 people, maybe packed. But before they started, the guy, I guess maybe the owner who runs the rodeo, they all started with scripture and prayer and included Jesus Christ. And I was like, talk about let's go, Brennan. I was like, that's a mimetic that actually happens every time they do the rodeo.
And that's going to be so much stronger, that those people are going to be so much more reluctant to give that one up than some political little.
Oh, yeah. These are trends. Exactly. Yeah. But people should take that. The Brandon thing, it's not about, these Democrats, we're going to sink them.
Right.
When you elevate think of it something way more intense. And that actually teared me up when I was approaching, because I wasn't yet in the stadium. I was like, I was hearing it from, 200 yards away. And I was like, I was just like so blown away. And I was like, this is memes. That's not even in the meme war. They know they're in a war, right? But they're not. It's in the physical, and it's not about. There wasn't like everybody share this. That happens every time they do a rodeo. You know what I mean? Like,
that's wild.
And so it kind of reminded me of that, of like where I value that example, but at the same time I don't value it because of the Brandon thing or Joe Biden. That is just, I'm so done with that. I'm just like, there's so much larger, and this, it's like there's so much larger paradigms to be
absolutely
participating in. But it does show that if it was similar to that, if it was like, let's go, whatever, if it was a Christian chant out of nowhere, that would transcend the entire it would crush the whole thing. It would just demonstrate, whoa, that's way beyond the left-right thing. Right. And so that's exactly kind of the exciting part.
That's exactly what I was trying to highlight in the metaverse about they're trying to make you act like an animal because that's how you're controllable. And so if you're still falling into the Democrat-Republican dynamic, if you're still, Joe Biden, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, it's like you're still an animal. Mm-hmm. The only way that we transcend and become totally uncontrollable is to be like Christ, because those things are us choosing to be like God and not our fallen nature, and that's what they cannot control. They cannot control that.
Right. They can't. Yeah, and that takes there are people who can embody what is the rejection of God. They can act consistent with rejecting God. But the challenge of for us is always looking at them and reminding that they are actually still made in the image of God, and that the unpredictable thing is to be like Christ, to be compassionate. He was able to, the way he was able to speak with people it was distinct. It wasn't this pastorally pointing down. It was within. That was the whole essence about it, was that you were not equal to, but on a lower level equal to. You know what I mean? Like, you weren't God, you're not Christ, but it just demonstrated what that looks like. And that's important for us in this. If you're mad at the mask people or your family, or you call, they're just V'ing it away, they're sheep, And guess what? You're a sheep too. It's just people following two different shepherds. And it's a reminder, that, it's not bad to be sheep, and it's not bad to be compliant. I've started to notice the wizardry around those words too, where they almost, if people are compliant, it's great for their global purpose, globalism. But if they're not compliant, then it's a double win, because then they get people thinking that being non-compliant is the answer. But it's actually, it's not compliance itself isn't bad, because we're compliant to moral law. We're compliant to what we believe and how we act. And the same thing with the sheep. It's like, oh, you're such a sheep. It's like, I noticed that was a trick too. It's pejorative, but at the same time, I'm like, well, no, it can't be. Being sheep-like itself can't be the bad thing, and being compliant itself can't be in itself the bad thing.
Right.
We're talking about what you're sheep-like to. Who are you following?
Because you're compliant to the state, and then if you reject the compliancy of the state, or this idea of compliancy itself, you're still stuck within a box of which the evil one is trying to keep you in. Absolutely.
And that's why it's important that there's always these binaries tempting you, and you always feel safer on one side with the Let's Go Brandon t-shirt or whatever than the other. But the true peace is through God. And it can't ever be the team. You could be on the team of God, but you can start to see when that even like how kings were ordained and leaders are ordained, and the condition was you operate through God's law, and you notice, and even knowingly, you'd be at the effect of your own power and weakness and greed and filth and all that. But that's the point, is that no matter what tribe you end up, you're going to have the same problems, so long as you base what's good, you base the direction in the material world. Fixing the world, healing the world, it's going to have the same outcome. That's why it can only be transcendental, because memes, information, laws of logic, morality, compassion, love, all of these uncreated energies, as you said, they're immaterial. Therefore, they can't be. There's no team in the physical. There's no. You can't, and people don't like that. They just go, no.
Because they want the tribe.
Yeah, they want
the tribe. And Christ came to eradicate Jew and Gentile. There is no more tribes.
Right.
There's just following him, and that's it.
Right.
Doesn't matter your color, creed, or where you come from, or anything that you did before. This is another thing, is the first person in the kingdom was the person to the right, the criminal, the thief, who recognized God and said, Lord, please remember me in your kingdom. He said, it will be done. He was the first one in heaven. And so it wasn't the most pious. It wasn't the most righteous. It was the person that was the most humble and recognized who God was and submitted to it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, I'm at a loss for words, because it's just so powerful, because it's not what you think the game is. Again,
it's not what you think the game is. Yeah.
It's not flesh and blood. It's really hard to remind yourself it's not flesh and blood. You got to constantly look at those demonic people. I just want to, if I was the king for a day, I would fix this world. That's still the same game.
Right.
I'm sorry. It just is.
Right.
So, but that doesn't mean you can't operate. I wanted to actually maybe end on this. In addition to how you meme Christ, how you embody what's good and true, and how you use your gifts in the world and share the word, how to still operate within. You were talking about, you can't, it's not just, being in a monastery. You can't just escape the world. You're in the world, not of it. But you don't have to escape. You don't have to be stressed. Yeah, you can want the homestead. You can save for this. But it's important to, and I thought you could speak to this, is that in a more theological framework, is that participating in the world, what looks like a utilitarian battle, it looks like you're battling flesh and blood. It looks like you're pursuing circumstances that you're more preferable or in line with your theology, which is fine. It's just that maybe address the balance between a material pursuit of life that reflects your theology and the spiritual, and that not to be caught up in, I can't really do any of this until I finally get my 1 acres. You know what I mean?
Right,
Some people might be disempowered because they're like, wait, what? I'm not pure. I don't feel like I'm doing it. I don't feel like I'm winning,
I totally can see that, and you hear people say that over and over. It's like they're somehow they're waiting for themselves to get themselves in order in regards to the relationship with God, which then, as we said, permeates all order. There is no waiting. Again, the thief who died to the right of Christ on the cross, it was an immediate recognition. And through that immediate recognition and transformation of his heart, he was accepted. You don't need the homestead. You don't fight this war by making sure you have a well, 6 acres, and a freezer full of meat. That's not how you win. Because if that's how you're thinking, you're still down here. You're still in the box. That we have to transcend the box and getting people into their heart, which then you can see the whole red pill manosphere also being a sort of psyop, because now it's trying to get you, you don't want to be in your heart. That's feminine. What are you, a fag? And
totally.
No, it's like, no. There, actual masculinity is like this perfect balance where you are totally consistent with your heart and what you feel and how you love people. How you love people is a real big deal, especially having children. Because your daughters, the way that you love them, they're going to recognize in the mates that they choose. And if they don't have a father, if they have a bad father, or they have a father that doesn't express love, well, they're going to be on a stripper pole or whatever they're doing on their OnlyFans or whatever. Because now it's just about attention, because the lack of attention they got, now they associate attention with, and it's like, whoa. Men, we have to get back in touch with our hearts and love in a proper way, but have so many boundaries and delineations and distinctions that we can't be moved from the rocks that we stand on.
Gotcha. And you can do that without your acre. That is, again, these are spiritual structures. Yeah. These are things that transcend the size of your house. They transcend how much food you have. They might affect those things positively, but that's not how you measure it. Just like you don't measure your connection or faith with God with things in the world.
Or blessings.
Must be good.
Blessings. Is
my son didn't get killed. It's because I was good. And it's like, no, that's actually not. It's not how it is. I mean, something bad might happen. What you consider bad, which is just another step in the direction toward God. And it's like that's the hard part of it. Whether it's something brutally tragic or just general discontent with your own existence. Like, how do I, and you're looking out at people and measuring, I wish and I do this. I'm like, I'm in a smaller space still. I want the land. But there's this wanting, that the attempt to want out in the world the things that you think will set your life up and relieve you of confronting this dark nature of things. Right. The desire for that might actually be taking you away from your connection with God, your relationship, your in the now relationship, and I can see that with myself. It's where I'll be daydreaming of the other side, not spiritual other side, the utility other side. And then it almost reminds me of like a story that may or may not have been written, but it just think of like a man dreaming of how he's going to finally get the land and the thing that will make life good and represent what he truly believes. And even if it's based in God, and then he gets it, and then you have it, and then you think you have it. And then suddenly, within the family structure that lives on that premise is the embodiment of greed, and all this stuff emerges anyway, because it's not about the land. It's not about, because these things are of not of flesh and blood. Again, you'll be haunted if you think the material world and your circumstance will somehow shield you from your fallen nature. You're already there. You're already, you're at the starting point of demise. Right. Because, that's the humility. You're fallen.
I struggle with this all the time, because I'm speaking to myself. I want a well. I want 6 acres. I want a wife. I want a freezer full of meat that can feed me for a year. But then I have to always keep in mind that this process of always making sure that I stream 3 days a week and I put in the hours it takes to prepare for the stream, and no matter what I get in return, that isn't the point. Even though at the same time I'm working, deliberately planning to save up money to then move into that situation. But in my heart, if I'm not in a place where I've submitted to God's will, and if that's not his will for me, then I have to be okay. If I'm not okay with that, well, then there's already this chasm between me and him in my heart, and it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah. You're just arguing, that then you're just arguing with God. You're
it's this idea that I'm going to make my future. And it's like, that's not how it works.
Right. Yeah. That it's very, especially for men, it's very much a vulnerability for us to be like, will you just make me win so that I could then tell people that it was you who made me win, but I can celebrate my win and own it.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It's like you're like I'm doing this for you, but really it's bullshit. You're like,
right, and he can see your heart and see that's exactly what you're not doing.
Right.
Oh, that's so good. First super chat comes from a bear, Fizzy Bear, and he says, again, say whatever you want to say about, I know this could be a contentious topic. He says, hey, Jimbob, what happens when you and Big Bear talk about the Trinity?
I don't think we really got into depth with the Trinity. He knows my stance on it. My stance generally on the view is that if people who are interested in pursuing the conversation and they're really interested in what it means and someone else, I'm friends with Owen, so I don't tread on that because to me that's an invitation based conversation. That's not a I just interject just because I'm going to tell you what I think. And so that's my experience. I think in retrospect, his contentions about it, as bold as they were, is that it actually it made me look further, not because I agree with the stance, is because I was like, it's actually a worthwhile thing of pursuing, just like philosophy, just like my connection to the word and understanding religion or Christianity from a young age was actually, I would argue, inhibited because I didn't have other tools to interact with concepts, distinctions. And again, based in this whole thing about memetics, is that if you're not operating in a coherent way of making distinctions and understanding things in different categories, like the whole concept of knowledge requires the law of identity, things having names, things being parts of sets being parts of larger sets, and all of these things. So I started to realize that, well, there has to be a way of properly, coherently arguing about all of these concepts. I believe that the Trinity can be argued coherently, but that doesn't change my view and my love for Owen. And it's not a point of contention between us. Like, I love that guy to death, like a brother. And so I take an approach where it's people pursue truth and they arrive at truth in certain ways. That doesn't mean truth is relative. It means that just like my mom prayed for someone to come into my life and show me the word in a way that I could get it. Not just any way, not just someone, some TV preacher. And so I keep that in mind with everybody. And I believe that anyone pursuing truth, I believe that if Trinitarianism is true and anyone actually pursuing truth is pursuing truth, then I have faith they will come to know the truth. I don't put it on me to force someone to know the truth. I can't do that. So,
no,
but otherwise, it's mostly comical.
Right. That's a great answer. And I think, we have to be careful, myself included, as apologists, because I'm sure Christ loved the people who didn't believe in him. And so we as Christians, and if you have a personal friendship with Owen, to negate that friendship, or as you said, trample on that friendship due to potentially something that could totally be resolved in the future,
Right.
that would be a lack of mercy, a lack of compassion, a lack of being Christ-like to him, which again, that may be, you may be, as you came to the knowledge of the Trinity through somebody, you may be the one that he comes through that knowledge. Who knows? So if anybody actually cares about Owen, they just pray. Just pray for discernment, pray for understanding, and so his pursuit of truth, it'll meet one way or another. Providence will happen.
Also, just to add, it's like Owen has always been someone who's just brutally says exactly what he thinks at the time. And he's changed his stance on a bunch of things. That doesn't mean changing your stance on things is a goal. It means that he's demonstrated to be someone who's very harsh in the moment of what he's saying and what he's attacking. And it's a part of his, it's not a shtick. It's really who he is. Right. I know that. And so I take that into consideration too. And I realize like, oh, well, no, I'm not going to like insert this if I know who he is as a person is kind of really, truly a loving person who wants to know. He wants things to make sense, especially, and I'll speak on his behalf because I've heard him tell me this and tell people this, is that he wants to be able to speak what is true to children and so they can understand it. That doesn't mean that all truth can be conveyed at every age. I mean, things get more complex too, but that to me is reasonable. I want to understand it in a way that I can explain it to kids, to my friends. And if it's frustrating to take something, and that's actually another point that he's made that's actually valid, is the people who are Trinitarians who aren't adequate in their faith and being able to argue. I think if there was a service,
highlighting
it's a great service.
Shortcoming for many, many people.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I kind of, that's my whole thing on that in one breath.
Right. No, I think that was beautifully well said. And as you said, that his sort of his comedic style is a radical transgression across certain boundaries. And so that's who he is. That's how he is learning and coming to his knowledge of God. Well, so be it. So everything can change. Everybody's heart can change. So if anybody's concerned out there, then you should be praying for him. You shouldn't be, maybe doing other activities that would make you less Christ-like or less aiding in that process.
Right.
Next super chat comes from Johan van Olden Barnvelt. That's a mouthful. Making it rain for a brother. Great show, guys. Well, thank you very much, Johan. Really appreciate the support. Roger Cheeto throws in a super chat. Says, would be an awesome to see you have Father Josiah Tremon on to talk Christian masculinity. Well, that's a possibility in the future. We'll see. I know he's a very busy man with 11 children and a extremely large parish in Southern California that doesn't wear a mask, and it goes against the stabby mandate. So he's got a lot on his plate.
11 children.
But hopefully that will be something in the future. Next super chat comes from Eric Breakbill, and he throws in a super chat. Says, what does the girl's shirt say in the painting where she is holding mandatory vaccines now in Jimbob's room?
Oh, it says "My Body, My Choice" on her T-shirt, but it says mandatory vaccines on her sign.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Eric Breakbill, for the super chat. And also, made by Jimbob's Instagram and his YouTube channel. Those links are in the video description if anybody is not already following. Jira Poalo, great supporter from Australia, throws in a super chat and says, sharing the blessing. Many thanks for the work. Well, thank you very much, Jira, and God bless you and your family in Australia. Stay strong. We're certainly praying for you guys and hoping that you guys can eventually shed off the fascistic tyranny that you guys are under. Next one comes from Deanna, one of our good Orthodox sisters here. She says, this is awesome. So glad I caught the stream. Glory to God. Well, thank you very much, Anna, and God bless you and your family. Hope everybody's doing well. And the last super chat comes from Doorman360, who says, I'm looking forward to receiving Jimbob's book in the mail. So I guess he's already ordered ordered a copy. So
on its way.
Well, brother, thank you so much. I didn't mean to keep you for 2.5 hours, but, that's how things go when we start talking about the nature of reality.
That's awesome. No, it was a great stream. It's a really good, very relevant topic. framework for looking at all of this stuff. And I think it'll help a lot of people kind of navigate through, because they really are interacting with always meaning and memes, essentially. Memetics, language, meaning.
Right. No, I thought it's funny. Again, I didn't know how it was going to go. I mean, I knew it was going to go well. They always do. But I just had bullet points on Memetics and just seeing where a conversation, it was so funny how it literally just wrapped itself up and came totally full circle. So
yeah,
thanks you again, brother, for being here. God bless you and your family. God bless your mission. God bless, your work. You're always hilarious, always funny. I recently saw your metaverse. When I got off the stream, I got on Instagram, saw your metaverse memes. Hilarious.
All right.
But is there anything you'd like to say before hopping off here to everybody?
No. Thank you for everyone who purchased Savage Memes Volume 3. It's if you haven't and you want it, it's at madebyjimbob.com. And again, they go fast, and I don't make them again. So people get upset because I don't put you're not making 1 and 2 again. I didn't get it. That's just how I'm doing it.
Right.
I want to move on and make more stuff. So big thanks for everyone who supports me through that. And again, if you want a painting, that's one of my passions, is actually painting this stuff in physical form. Love the idea that something's in physical form in someone's house. Again, speaking to Memetics, it's in multiple people have their favorite painting meme on their wherever it is in their living room, whatever. And I think that really that's awesome. If I can do more of those, I prefer it. It makes me happy to actually sit and physically paint.
Do you want people to go to your website or reach out to you personally?
Yeah, just reach out to me. You can email me, madebyjimbob@gmail. You can go to my website and go to the art section to see kind of the sizes and prices for the things like that. Again, it's any meme you've ever seen me do, basically, in single frame. So
I love it. That's never going to go out of style. Well, Thank you so much, brother. Again, God bless you and yours. And as always,